The bill will bring in a raft of measures designed mainly to protect tenants from unscrupulous landlords. That includes banning so-called no-fault evictions, where a tenant can be asked to leave without any reason being given. Landlords will also be unable to raise rents more than once a year or to, quote, unreasonably refuse pets. As expected, the bill has divided opinion neatly between those who rent out property and those renting it. To discuss this and to have a conversation about the bill that's coming, I'm joined by property agent Abdul Kawi Karim and from the Priced Out campaign for affordable housing, Freddie Poser. Well, I'm going to come to you first, Freddie. Obviously, this is something that you welcome. Does it go far enough for you?
Well, I think the bill is going to be an interesting one. I think the way tenants have been feeling for the last few decades is that they are at the complete whims of the landlords. They can be kicked out of the flat with very little notice. Rents can be raised whenever the landlord feels like it. However, I don't think that the renters reform bill, whilst a good step in the right direction, is necessarily the right option. We'd much prefer to see it priced out, that the government focus on expanding the supply of properties, because the real protection that a tenant can have is the option to say to their landlord, well, I can get a cheaper rent somewhere else. In the end, one of the things that gives landlords so much power is that there aren't enough properties to rent. So you have to accept whatever they're going to offer you. We're campaigning that one of the things that should be returned in this bill is legal aid for tenants in rental disputes. We think that that would make a big difference to enforcing these rights. But part of the issue is hard to enforce a right when you don't have other options. So the key thing will be to expand the supply.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it, Abdullah? And presumably you would like to see more homes built as well. But what's your initial reaction to this proposed bill?
The initial reaction to this proposed bill, I know a lot of landlords will be upset with the no-fault eviction, but I do say that it is fair because it's balanced with the Section 8, that if you do want to evict a tenant, if they're antisocial or their rent arrears, you do have these options. So it kind of does balance the scale. But like he said, we need to consider the fact that there's not options. So including this may lead some landlords to want to sell or leave the market again, which is not going to be helpful because it's going to reduce the supply. So really our focus is to get into more development. So my company, Ace Investment Properties, what we do is we work with developers and landlords and encourage them to do new things like work with the permit development rights, to convert commercial properties, to create more housing so we can really boost the economy. And
are you seeing landlords saying to you, well, we're just going to sell up, we're fed up with this, we're being pressed again?
See, this is the thing, because this is a step. It's not, we can't look at this as a single occasion. There's loads of things. There's the increase in the interest rates. There's the Section 24 changes. So as part of this bill, landlords are going to have to be a part of it.
Explain what you mean by Section 24 changes for those of us not in the market.
So the Section 24 changes, to make it quick, is that essentially when you were operating your rental business, you could deduct your mortgage interest. So a lot of landlords have mortgages.
Yes.
So you could deduct it from your tax bill so you'd pay less tax.
I see, right, OK.
Now the government have changed it so you will pay the full tax on all of your income, even though some of it is costs. So that can literally wipe out 50% of the profits for a landlord.
Yeah.
So if you look at it, this is pushing a lot of landlords to the short-term rental market. Because if you're looking at a serviced accommodation, you don't have these Section 24. So it seems like the government is encouraging landlords to not even deal with tenants, and they're placing this wedge in between when we should be working together to get more property.
I mean, this bill, there's a lot in it that I don't think anybody could argue with, particularly the issue of not being able to have rent rises within a year, because that's been a real problem, Freddie, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think that it's not unreasonable that landlords should have to set out when they're going to raise the rent so that people can, plan their financial year. I think that's very reasonable. I think more worrying is what is this going to look like for the rental sector as a whole, and especially in high-cost areas where we already don't have enough rental properties. And
Abdul's saying that some of the landlords will simply say, right, I'm not going to have this anymore.
Absolutely, and what's interesting is, as Abdul has pointed out, there are weird quirks in the UK tax code that can push you towards other forms of accommodation that I think we want, short-term lets, for example, which aren't as beneficial as having people actually give people a safe home. So the key thing about the Renters Reform Bill is to get the balance right, making sure that renters are protected, because there are some really bad landlords out there, and some of the stories are utterly heartbreaking, how people feel completely insecure in their own home and they can't start a family because you might be kicked out.
Yeah.
we need to balance that with making sure there are places for people to live. It's not about a tiny violin for landlords, but it is about making sure there are high-quality properties available on the market. And the way to do that, what Michael Gove really should be doing, is building those houses, building places for people to live.
And where would you say he needs to build those houses? Because, of course, there's always this big debate about, the green belt and all of that sort of thing. I mean, where would you build those new houses?
Absolutely. I think there are lots of places you could build them. I think, as the Labour Party is starting to say, we need to have a discussion about parts of the green belt. When I was here yesterday, actually, I was talking about how the green belt isn't all green, and there are parts that I don't think anyone would miss.
You mean it's sort of brown, as we would call it?
It's brown field. It's brown field, but green belt. So green field and green belt aren't necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
But if you want to protect the green belt, then the other thing you could do is build up in cities. You could, add stories, build on tube station car parks, and we see opposition to that as well. It's not necessarily one or the other, but we need to pick some development to go ahead because we desperately need more homes in this country.
And do you think, Abdul, that the government has listened to the concerns of landlords? Because obviously they've been working with people in the tenant sector. Do you think they've listened to landlords?
Not a chance.
No?
Not a chance.
That's pretty clear.
A lot of the landlords I know, being honest, they feel like there's a wealth grab going on.
Yeah.
They feel like all of these increase in costs leading them to sell off, and it's just a ploy to get landlords out of the market. And it is quite sad to see. It is quite sad to see. I do not feel like landlords are working. The government is working with landlords. I feel like they're completely opposed to landlords. And if anything, they're trying to put a wedge between landlords and renters, especially with bills like this and all of these sensationalized headlines to make it seem like it's landlords versus renters, when really what we want to do is make sure there are decent homes. There are some good things in this bill, such as wanting to have the decent home standards and making sure there are safe spaces. But overall, I do not feel like the government are doing a lot.
And this whole characterisation, and I accept that there are unscrupulous landlords, but they're very much in the minority. And so this characterisations of landlords are bad, poor tenants are under pressure. I mean, it doesn't help.
I think it's important to remember the balance here. Landlords are economic agents. They are there to make money, and that's fine, and they should be regulated at that. At least on an emotional level, these are people's homes. So if you had to come down on one side, I think it's fair for the government to say that more important is that people feel safe in their homes. And as I say, when I talk about the rental market, I'm not interested in what happened to landlords. That's a sort of sectoral interest. But it does matter for renters that landlords feel able to let into the market. And I think that's where we find common ground here. I don't feel bad for landlords, but also I'm worried about the long-term effects this bill could have for the renters that it's meant to protect.
And do you think that conversation between landlords and tenants is something that really, and tenants' organisations is something that needs to happen, Abdul? Because otherwise, things are getting lost in translation here, and actually you're making the market worse.
Absolutely. I feel like with Freddie and landlords and renters, we're all on the same page that there is possibility to make profit in the market, have decent homes, and have everybody together. It is just really looking forward to development and how we can build more new homes and do it in a sustainable way that does boost the economy and everybody prospers. That nobody really needs to suffer if we do it correctly. Yeah.
And Freddie, do you believe that that's something that should happen too, that conversation between landlords and tenants?
Absolutely. There are win-wins out there, and there are good landlords out there who provide good homes for their tenants and provide a real service. It's about making sure the balance is right and protecting people from potentially the minority, but certainly the landlords out there who do exploit their tenants.
Yeah.